Mr. Byrne, you're recognized.
Thank you. Admiral Fowler, good to see you. For some time, you and I have discussed, and we've discussed on this committee, the need to have a naval presence in your AOR. You finally got the USS Detroit. Tell us what impact has come from that.
Well, just associate myself with the remarks of General O'Shaughnessy on the importance of ships, Coast Guard assets, U.S. Navy ships. At the end of the day, we've got to have platforms to do the work, and they both enable us to do detection and monitoring, to find and then use law enforcement assets, Coast Guard law enforcement detachments to do the interdiction. It also allows us to train with our partners and perform a variety of missions. In the case of Detroit, the first deployment of littoral combat ship to the region, it performed above all standards, good operational readiness. We took that ship off the coast of Venezuela. We did a freedom of navigation operation. The ship performed superbly. Ship was involved in counter-narcotics operations, and it was welcome. And so we'll see that ship back. And so that presence sends a big statement about U.S. commitment, sends a big statement to our friends, reassures them, and then to our adversaries that those are capable platforms.
Would you like to have more?
We have a demand signal that is unmet through the global force distribution. And I think our Navy would like to have more, and we'd like to have some of that presence in Southcom. Our 4th Fleet, which is the counterpart to 2nd Fleet in Norfolk, they focus on building partner capacity, working with our partners and exercises. You've got to have ships to do that. You've got to have assets to do that. And I think the littoral combat ship, you and I have been to sea on one. Yeah. They provide the right kind of platform for this region to meet our partners' needs. And the ships, it had some problems in the past. It's working those bugs out, and we've been happy with the deployment of Detroit.
Good. Last year, we authorized and appropriated money to convert an expeditionary fast transport to a medical transport. Does this type of capability help with your missions in Southcom?
It does. We have one deployed with us now. We've asked for more. We think we could use it as a platform for a range of missions, counter-narcotics mission, to put Marines on. The Commandant of the Marine Corps has been very clear he wants to get the Marine Corps back to sea. This platform can hold in the neighborhood of hundreds of Marines, and it can be flexible to move around and allow those Marines to engage partner Marines. The United States Marine Corps, like our Navy, are the gold standard. Partners want to train with them and learn from them, and then that plays back when our partners need to fight alongside us, as some of them have had to do in past wars. And so we welcome that ship as a flexible platform. It turns out they're in demand by all the combatant commanders, and we are making a case for why a couple more, working in tandem with perhaps littoral combat ship as a floating logistics base, in addition to working with Marines. You know, the fast speed, shallow draft, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility in those platforms, and we've asked for those, as well as we've asked for the acceleration of the expeditionary staging bases, which are built out in San Diego, as a way to move Marines around the theater, make a statement of U.S. presence and commitment, and importantly, get our partners engaged in the training. Important platforms.
Let me shift gears for a minute. What effect has the reduction in foreign assistance to the Northern Triangle had on your ability to work with partners and allies in the region?
The funding's been restored, and it's critical in the mill-to-mill range that IMET training, for example, is what we'd apply to a country like Honduras. I use those examples. So while that funding was suspended, and I agree that the pressure actually worked that we placed, and those nations have stepped up to do more on the migration. So the pressure was good. The pause in funding, to me, in a way, demonstrated the commitment of our partners. Hondurans transferred money around, and they value our education so much that they paid for it. But something clearly didn't get done as a result of that. So the consistent funding in those realms is important to build their capacity. Again, has to be a return on investment shown. We've seen that. So there was an impact, but I think we're through that now, and we're moving ahead. And those nations have stepped up to demonstrate why they are responsibly using the funds that our taxpayers are providing. It's got to have a show return on investment.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Ms. Torres-Small, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here and for your service to our country. General O'Shaughnessy, in the context of a heightened period such as we are in today, with the eve of the 2020 elections and the aftermath of the Soleimani strike, can you speak to how NORTHCOM liaises with DHS's cybersecurity and infrastructure security agencies, CISA, the FBI, U.S. Cyber Command, and the National Security Agency to monitor for domestically targeted threats from overseas adversaries such as China and Russia?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for allowing me to highlight some of the great work that is being done. And there is collaboration here, and that's the exciting part. Literally, from the day that CISA stood up, literally the very day they stood up, we had liaisons embedded within there, and they had liaisons embedded within our command and control organization at NORTHCOM. And so literally from as it was birthed, we were able to be part and connected with CISA. Almost every event that we do, we end up there with CISA because you can't separate Homeland Defense and Homeland Security to that point. And in fact, I meet more with the Secretary of Homeland Security, I think, than even the Department of Defense because we have such a tight relationship there.
And what's NORTHCOM's specific role in that partnership?
Right. One of the things that we found is it is a team effort, right? And you mentioned the right players that are part of that. One of the things NORTHCOM has found is we can apply the same model that we've been using for hurricanes and applying federal capability to some of the state and local issues. We found that we can actually apply that using that model and taking the expertise, for example, in Cyber Command and applying it through NORTHCOM in a defense support to civil authorities model. So I'll use the elections as an example. In both the 18 and now even in the Super Tuesday we just had, we actually brought all of the tags into our headquarters, and we had Paul Nakasone from Cyber Command there and Joe and Gail there. We provide them information at the highest classification level of what the threats were that were out there. We then gave them some capability and capacity that they could bring back to their states because it's just not fair for a state, like a local state like Colorado is where I live, to be competing with Russia as an example. And so
General,
that brings
I promise I'm not cutting you off because you're from Colorado, but I do want to switch to get to another point quickly. Admiral Fowler, I'm going to switch to you just briefly. I really appreciated my colleague's discussion with you about the Northern Triangle, and I just want to follow up slightly. I noticed in your statement, and I appreciate your concern about South America's increasing absorption into China's Belt and Road Initiative. And these tactics of predatory economics provide the pathway for China to hold significant leverage over the region's affairs. I know that you talked about the funding being restored, but during the time that it was frozen, do you believe that it helped malign actors like Russia and China grow in the region?
It certainly provides an additional window for there to come in and work their tactics and techniques. And you know, what we hear from partners is that they want to partner with the U.S. They want to align with us. And I don't actually get into the choosing thing, but we do talk about democracies and values and consistent long-term relationships and respect for human rights and rule of law and those sorts of things that align themselves. And we then expand it beyond the predatory loans to IT that not only has a front door but a back door right into Beijing, to illegal fishing and illegal mining and construction of questionable construction and all these sorts of things. And the clear choice is to partner with the U.S. But in order to do that, we've got to be present. And I think we're at the level, we're back to the level now with the countries, Northern Triangle, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, that allows us to continue to commit and have them pay back on our security.
And just very briefly, could you mention any specific programs that the State Department and USAID have that work especially well to enhance regional security and protect our interests in the Northern Triangle?
I mentioned it several times today. The IMET program, international education, is key. The Foreign Military Finance, FMF program, is a State Department program, gained at, it's multi-year, gains at security cooperation. That's important. State Department has a GPOI, Global Peace Operations program. That, for example, allows the El Salvadorians to deploy to Mali.
Okay, I've got one more question, so thank you, and we'll follow up on those. I apologize. General O'Shaughnessy, one more question for you. As migration flow at our southern border has decreased, have the number of active duty troops decreased commensurately?
Ma'am, they've been consistent throughout this year, both calendar and fiscal year, to what the request for assistance had come from the Department of Homeland Security.
So you have not decreased the troops, they have not returned to their missions?
They have not, they've been steady state.
Okay, thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Torres Small. Mr. Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Admiral Fowler, Recently, I've been hearing rumors that there's a potential for up to a 20% reduction in security cooperation funding within DOD. If true, I'm extremely concerned about the disproportionate impacts these cuts will have in your AOR and also in AFRICOM, some of those places where we do a lot more with less. I'm extremely concerned that I think a large part of that is planned to be taken out of the state partnership program, which gives tremendous benefits all across the world and is a low cost, so we cut something that's really effective. Can you talk about the strategic risks that a cut to security cooperation and specifically the state partnership program would have on Southcom?
The Defense-wide review did cut 20% from the department's what we call our 333 security cooperation program, and those cuts have been distributed across the combatant commands. The FY21 percentage of that cut for Southcom is rate at about 20%. Southcom's been decreased in that fund 32% in the last 3 years, and we've had to make some hard choices on prioritization, and prioritization is important, so that there's no argument there in terms of prioritization. But our Guard teams and your state's Guard team partnership with Bolivia is they're key, and they fall in on, they're often, those Guard teams, state partnership teams, are the force providers that go along with the security cooperation fund. So with just the people without the funds, it really doesn't provide a whole package for some of the engagements. We're looking at how do we restart our relationship for Bolivia, for example, and that'll be challenging for us to find the funds to leverage that relationship. I will argue that that's great power competition in a long-term investment, as we provide a modest amount of investment in a country like Bolivia or Ecuador or Peru that gives us leverage and allows us to train, allows us to be interoperable with our partner, allows them to get after threats that affect us and them. So the drug threat is a perfect example. It pays long-term dividends and gives the United States of America positional advantage against future great power moves from China and Russia. Somebody's going to fill the void. One of our chiefs of defense said, when you need a lifeline, a life ring, you're going to take it from anybody. I said, yeah, but careful what the rope around that lifeline does to you.
And you're right. We also have a state partnership with Uzbekistan, which has yielded tremendous benefits in CENTCOM's AOR based on a state partnership and a personal relationship that I have that was established long ago through my Guard state partnership job. Talking about Bolivia, I'm hopeful that we can re-engage, and I know that our Adjutant General is re-engaging, and I think there's some opportunities there to get in on the ground floor and establish relationships that help us carry that forward. So I hope that we will continue to strengthen the state partnerships in Bolivia and other areas, and also the IMET. We've got to use that, and I know that you do, but places like Bolivia where we haven't in the past had people in IMET, the sooner we get engaged, the sooner we are influencing and making friends with the leaders of 20 or 30 years from now, which is very important. I was just recently in Iraq, and the Chad was actually a guy I served with in 5 over there, and we recognized each other, and that goes a long way. So if you would just briefly, what can we do to strengthen the state partnership program in the Western Hemisphere?
I think the things General O'Shaughnessy mentioned, where he brings the state partners together, we do the same thing. We bring them together. We talk about what our shared objectives are. How do we reach those shared objectives with a partner? How do we make the best? And for us, a state partnership is our principal force that we send to these nations. And so how do we ensure that we're doing that most efficiently? Predictability is important, because we've got to be able to tell our partner nations and our state partners a year out that you can depend on this month, this time, that we want to be unpredictable to our enemies, but predictable to our partners in the Guard and to our nation, partner nation. So stable on-time budgets, the consistent funding level are very, very important as we go forward.
And just finally, I just want to compliment both of you guys and all our other COCOM commanders. You guys are really engaged with the state partnership program and give good guidance so that we make sure that our Guard units from 54 different states and territories are engaged with the right priority, which are DOD's priorities. So I just thank you for what y'all do every day with our state partnership programs. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Escobar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you for being here today, and thank you most especially for your service. General O'Shaughnessy, it was wonderful to visit with you yesterday, and I really appreciated our conversation and the time that you took, and your commitment to ongoing communication, especially with regard to Fort Bliss and El Paso. And my questions really are going to center around some of the conversations that we had yesterday. I know NORTHCOM oversees critical missions that help provide for our security, and you and I talked about how important those missions are. That's why one of the things I'm always concerned about is the opportunity cost of tapping military resources. When we apply military resources to legal asylum seekers, we take our eyes off of genuine national security threats. With regard to the latest crisis response force being deployed to the border, including to my community, El Paso, can you indicate what missions they would otherwise be engaged in, and how are those losses made up?
Yes, ma'am. First, I would highlight that this force that we're talking about, approximately 160, of which 80 went to California and 80 went to Texas. That force is actually assigned to us for this particular mission set. This is actually an opportunity to highlight the great work we do with the Department of Homeland Security, realizing that, to your point, that this force is really for a different purpose, and they allowed us to keep that force at home at Fort Polk in order to maximize the readiness for that force. They were able to train together. They were able to stay at home with their families until they were actually needed for, in this case, what they were seeing as an increased demand signal as a result of the Ninth Circuit Court decision. And so in some ways that was a positive, because they have, since October, they've been on this mission set, but they haven't had to deploy to actually go do the mission on the border. Our commitment to DHS was that if they asked for it, though, we would make it available to them. So we did in the timelines that they were so inclined to do so. But this is a military police force. This is also includes helicopters and a general purpose force. So we have tried to walk that balance of maintaining the readiness while still contributing to our lead federal agency for securing the border, Department of Homeland Security.
I do want to point out that what has been unusual and new and particularly alarming to my community is the sight of military personnel with guns at our ports of entry. Ports of entry that are utilized every single day by tens of thousands of people in a community that is binational, bicultural, truly international, a community really that sees itself as one region. And we see our ports of entry as symbols of unity and symbols of friendship and familial ties as well, and economic ties. And while this may be, part of the umbrella of work, having seen this just happen recently has been jarring to many members of my community. How long do you expect the crisis response force to be engaged at our ports of entry in this way?
Ma'am, I would say first I want to send kudos to our teammates in this. Our Department of Homeland Security brethren, our Customs Border Protection, they do a phenomenal effort every day across not only the ports but across the border at large. Specifically to this particular deployment, it will last as long as Customs and Border Protection feel that they need to have this capability there. So I can't give you a specific answer. It's not tasked. It's actually on call, if you will, for the remaining of the fiscal year. I don't believe it'll be deployed for that long. I suspect over time, in coordination with Department of Homeland Security, they will relieve us of that particular mission set. I would also note that they're not the primary responders. They're there as a backup for our lead federal agency in doing this mission.
I understand that. It still is really jarring to have families who have been used to seeing our ports of entry in a very positive light suddenly see military enforcement on these ports. Are they? What are the specific duties? Do you know what the specific duties are for the folks that are actually on the ports of entry? And I'm running out of time, so if you wouldn't mind just being as succinct.
Very quickly, and this might actually help. First, we transport the DHS members, the CBP members, to the right place. Second, we provide the engineering capability to move obstacles if they need to move obstacles very quickly. And only third, in a tertiary role, do we have our military police that could be employed.
Thank you so much, General. I just want to reiterate for the public that the Congress has funded the Department of Homeland Security, 2 supplementals, hundreds of millions of dollars, and I believe they are well equipped to do the job. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Escobar. Mr. Gallagher, you're recognized.
Thank you. Secretary Rapuano, I want to thank you for your consistent engagement with the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Thank you for mentioning the work of the report in your testimony and the concept of layered cyber deterrence. We are, as you mentioned, releasing our findings today. For those who are interested or perhaps having trouble sleeping, this is the final report. You can get a copy from all of us. For the literal tens of people watching on C-SPAN right now, this is the report right here. But we do hope that we can spark a debate, and your work was essential to the final product. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to, because so much of our final strategic recommendation involves building upon the progress that's been made within DOD around Defend Forward. Could you briefly sort of describe the genesis of Defend Forward and the steps you've taken to implement that as part of DOD's overall cyber and national defense strategy?
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman Gallagher. Defend Forward is really about preempting, deterring, defeating malevolent cyber activity targeting the United States. And in order to do that, you have to be forward. You have to be understanding how adversaries are operating, what tools they're using, what techniques they're applying. So that is really the driving emphasis of our strategy in terms of where we were several years ago and where we are today.
And then a lot of what we talked about in the course of the Commission's work was, you know, in some sense, the difference between deterrence in cyber and strategic nuclear deterrence in the Cold War is that there was little margin for error and for failure in the latter, but we start from a position of sort of constant failure, particularly below the threshold for military force in cyber, and therefore we need to build in a certain level of resilience in the face of failure. Do you think with that in mind, and when we talk about homeland defense, let's say there's a significant cyber attack, would it make sense to have some sort of continuity of the economy plan in place with accompanying legal authorities to be more resilient and be able to recover quickly in the case of such a massive cyber attack?
So I think what you're getting at is identifying the most critical infrastructure functions that may be vulnerable to cyber, identifying them as such, and applying specific measures of effectiveness and applications of security that should be applied to those systems, and thinking through what rapid reconstitution would be required if there were successful attacks against these most critical elements of the nation's economy and other vital functions.
Thinking through the unthinkable and being ready prior to a crisis to potentially mitigate the effects of a
Correct.
crisis. And then finally, I just would say one of the recommendations that may not get as much attention is this idea that we've talked about at the subcommittee level of having the Cyber Mission Force do a force structure assessment. Those of us who deal with the Navy argue about, you know, the Navy's force structure assessment or lack thereof sometimes. Similarly, the Cyber Mission Force was designed based on outdated requirements from 2013. And so we are sort of asking you and General Nakasone and others to do some analysis and tell us, given everything that's changed in the interim and the threat landscape in cyber, what is the appropriate force structure for cyber? Is that something that makes sense to you?
So Secretary Esper has already tasked that to be done, an assessment for cyber operating forces, you know, looking back at what drove the original numbers, where we are today, the very significant dramatic changes in terms of the threat environment, as well as in the capabilities and authorities of the Department of Defense and other agencies as well. And what is that, how well do we understand what types of capabilities, expertise, need to be represented in that force. So that's being done as we speak.
Well, fantastic. And again, thank you for your engagement with the Commission. Thank you for your leadership. And again, and a shameless plug to the Commission's work. It's also available, shocker, online, solarium.gov, for those who would like to read the final work of the Commission. We hope this will, if nothing else, spark a debate about the status quo in cyber. And I think all of your testimonies have shown how important this new domain of geopolitical competition that is cyber is. So thank you, gentlemen, for all of your service. Appreciate it, and I yield back.
Mr. Gallagher, would you like to submit those for the record?
That is a great idea. Can I submit these for the record?
I ask unanimous consent to include into the record all member statements and extraneous material, including the Cyberspace Solarium Commission reports. Without objection, so ordered. Ms. Lurie, you are recognized.
Thank you. And I'd like to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Burns' comments about the LCS deployment to Southcom. And over the course of these hearings last year, I specifically asked each geographic combatant commander about the presence that they have received in their region versus what they have requested through the GFM process. And it's good to hear that we've increased exponentially from 0 to 1 this year, but I wanted to focus back on the importance of that deployment to the Southcom region. And you mentioned FON ops, so freedom of navigation ops, partnership missions, counter-narcotics operations. And just for a moment, I'd like to focus on the capability of the LCS as a platform, as a suitable platform for those types of missions in the Southcom AOR. And as a caveat, the reason I mention that is because in other hearings with the Navy, there's been discussion of decommissioning the first 4 ships of the class as early as 12 years in their life. So can you comment on how effective that platform is for missions in areas such as Southcom?
It's a very effective platform. It's versatile, has a large flight deck. The variants that we've deployed, we've sent with unmanned fire scout capability as well as manned helicopter. That really exponentially improves the ability to search out the ISR over time. The mission capability, the large internal reconfigurable spaces are important for the full range of mission sets. We've been up to Mayport, Florida and visited some. I've taken my Marine Forces South commander with me. Lots of potential there for Marines to go afloat with flexible, maneuverable ability. So we can partner as a naval force with our partners and in exercises, as well as the mission sets that you mentioned.
So would you include in the utility of that platform also the 4 ships, the first 4 ships of the class? We are looking at decommissioning ships well beyond the end of their service life, yet it sounds like the baseline capabilities of these ships would be useful within Southcom for the missions that you're accomplishing?
And broadly, ma'am, I'd say numbers do matter. There's a value to capacity and the capability it brings. I know the Navy's challenged with the budget numbers and readiness, and I know there's been some challenges with these lead ships of the class on readiness. I don't think I'm in a position from the readiness trade-off and cost to comment on the utility of those first 4, but I would say that broadly we don't have enough platforms.
Right, so I was going to say presence is important, and presence in the Southcom AOR, you've reiterated numerous times how important that is to our allies and to the other actors within the region. And so I've frequently discussed the OFRP, or the Optimized Fleet Response Plan, and how that is not generating as much presence as I believe the Navy's capability has. So if I'm taking it, you would prefer to see more presence generated than purely surge capability from the vessels that the Navy currently has, not even talking about upcoming shipbuilding.
Well, you stated it well and better than I. 0 is equals 0 in any math equation, or it's infinity, unsolvable. So we have to be present in some levels to compete. And so that persistent presence is important in addition to the presence that we might provide from an exercise. And so it does take numbers of ships to do that. I think that the OFRP readiness model is capable of generating the right readiness for that presence. Not all the ships have to be, in my view, to go to South America and Latin America, the Caribbean, ready for every warfare mission. They have to be safe to steam, they have to be able to protect themselves, and they also have to be able to partner and do the counter-narcotics mission set. And so I think we can look at this globally and put the right presence at the right time, and ships are one of our critical gaps.
And you also mentioned earlier the MMSV, the multi-mission support vessel. And can you talk a little bit more about that construct and what other types of somewhat out-of-the-box type combinations of vessels, whether they be contract, MSC operated, Navy or Coast Guard, that could provide further capabilities that are really specific to your region, and that essentially done at a lower cost than our high-end ships such as DDGs or cruisers.
Well, thanks to filling an unfunded priority, this innovative multi-mission vessel is making a huge difference, and we've put it in as an unfunded for next year at $18 million for the request. And I think it's a game changer.
So you're basically saying $18 million is making a big difference.
That's $18 million funding for the entire year for the ship, for the multi-mission vessel. I would also just be remiss if I didn't talk about how much more the Coast Guard's doing. They sign up for 4 force packages a year, and they're currently supplying 8. And so Coast Guard is punching well above its weight in this AOR.
It's great to see the Coast Guard providing that capacity, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I'd like to think further about the MSC platforms and specifically how we could leverage those types of platforms for exactly the mission that you're talking about. So I'd like to have an opportunity to continue that conversation later.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Luria. Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you all for everything that you do, and Admiral, thank you for your time this week. So I just want to again shift back to some of the great power competition that we're seeing in our own backyard. I'm not very sanguine about it at all. I think we need, as this committee and as leaders, need to be ringing the alarm bells to the American people, who I don't know fully appreciate the level of what's going on just to our south and frankly across the United States. So while I fully support the national defense strategy, I'm not so sure about the apportionment that we're seeing in this budget, as you heard a number of members mention. I mean, this committee will literally authorize hundreds of billions of dollars of buying more stuff, a lot of stuff. A lot of it focused on the Taiwan scenario, and I fully support that. But as we've all mentioned, security assistance is great power competition. Partnering with our partners is great power competition. The state partnership program, Florida's partner is Venezuela, is great power competition. So while we're kind of shoulder to shoulder or force to force wargaming out the Indo-Pacific, we have the termites eating up our foundation right in our backyard, and I find that incredibly concerning. So first question for you, Admiral, can you tell us more about China and Russia boots on the ground in Venezuela? It's mentioned in your testimony advisors. Are those uniformed Russian military that are on the ground in Venezuela advising the Maduro regime?
We have Cubans in the thousands, Russians in the hundreds, Chinese in lesser amounts. These Russians range from contractors working on air defense systems, working on helicopters, working on Su-30s, to special force, the highest end special forces that are present.
Spetsnaz.
Yes, sir. That's right. More broadly, I'd like to expand the Russian presence in the AOR. We saw a record number of Russian ship deployments this year. The cable survey, cable cutting ships currently on station doing their work here. Russian high-end frigate that has cruise missile, nuclear capable cruise missile that came around and with several other ships came into Northcom's AOR. Late last year, we had Russian bombers fly into Venezuela. So Russians have also invested in a training center in Nicaragua.
Would you say that the Monroe Doctrine is at risk?
Well, I think the Russians see the value of their access, presence, and influence here in the hemisphere, as well as the Chinese. You mentioned the Chinese. We've been asking ourselves the question, Ambassador Maines fought the hard fight as ambassador in El Salvador. Why would the Russians, or the Chinese, excuse me, try to lock up 75% of the coast of El Salvador in a 99-year lease? Now, they were thwarted, but they're still at it. Why is China trying to buy a deep water port in Jamaica? And why has China built a road across Jamaica, which they have a 50-year lease to collect all the tolls on that road? It's not a very good deal.
I think in addition, I was just down in Panama with Representative Rogers and Representative Scalise. I think the American people need to understand the Chinese own the Panama Canal now. They own the ports on both sides. and they're putting the ports they don't own out of business. And we have had frigates that cannot stop and get the repairs they need because the Chinese ownership, backed ownership, have said no. Do you find that concerning? And you know, obviously a part of our con plans, our contingency plans, be able to shift our fleets from east to west or vice versa. And if the Chinese own the Panama Canal built by Americans, does that concern you as a military commander?
Our most significant exercise every year is the defense of the Panama Canal exercise. And as you noted,
Should we be back in Panama? Sorry, Admiral, I'm just very short on it. Should we be back in Panama?
I think
American boots on the ground?
I think it's something we should approach carefully with the government of Panama. The new government is very aligned with U.S. interest and is looking to reverse some of the Chinese influence, and we should approach carefully what the best access is there. It is a strategic location, and we need to stay engaged there.
General, just in my time remaining, my understanding in the Bahamas, the Chinese are very aggressively moving into the Bahamas, 50 miles off the coast of the United States, and buying shipping or fishing rights when we have one of our most sophisticated underwater testing facilities there that test all of our submarines, our unmanned vehicles. What are we doing in terms of the Chinese influence in the Bahamas?
And as I'm short of time, I'll just broadly say that we are concerned about the Chinese influence there, both from the commercial investment in resorts that then equates to influence. ATEC is the particular place you're referring to. We have sensitive operations there that we want to keep sensitive and be able to do what we do there without intrusion from the Chinese. So yes, we are concerned, and I think sometimes we forget that it's
General,
50 miles off our coast.
Your
Can I
time
take
has
the rest of that
expired.
for the
I
record?
request that you take this conversation for the record, and Mr. Garamundi, you're recognized.
I almost want to yield you another 5 minutes. You're onto something very important, Mr. Waltz. Every answer to your question was, we're concerned. That is totally unsatisfactory. Yeah, we're concerned too, but what are you doing about it?
With the Chinese, our best efforts are to stay engaged through education, exercise security cooperation. One of our main
Well,
maneuver
we've already
forces.
heard that the security cooperation money is being taken out of the appropriations and out of the budget. We had that discussion earlier. The point here is, yeah, we're concerned, but at the same time, we're not providing the resources that concern can actually result in action. And there's much, much more. Nobody here has yet asked about the infamous border wall ripoff. $11 billion. 1.1 billion, 1.4 billion or 2 billion taken from the National Guard across the United States, all of them, for their equipment. Mr. Rapuano, is that creating a national security problem within the borders of the United States when the National Guard doesn't have its equipment? The answer is yes, okay? Is it yes or no?
The decision was it was a prioritization process made by the
To do
Secretary
what?
of Defense.
To build a border wall.
To meet direction from the president to address a homeland security challenge that
So
the
it was the
department was
president's
not equipped
decision.
to
What
do
is
on its
your
own.
view?
My view is that DHS is supporting the enforcement of laws on the border legislated by Congress and is overwhelmed in terms of its capacity by the numbers crossing illegally.
That is a lot of, that's just not factual. You know that's not factual. So don't give us that, all right?
That is factual.
Then deliver to me the facts. Not alternate facts. Deliver to us the facts, okay? When will you have those facts in my office?
We can provide you all the information upon which we based our response to DHS
When will you have it
request
in
for
my office?
assistance. We'll provide you copies.
When?
When?
Yeah, tomorrow?
No, not tomorrow, but
But when?
next
Don't
week.
dance with me. When will
Next
you
week,
deliver
I
those
think
facts?
we can do that
When?
by Wednesday of next week.
Very good. I'll expect it.
You'll have it.
$11 billion taken out of the Department of Defense activities all across this world, including within the United States, Puerto Rico, Guam, New York, New Mexico. Critical national projects that were determined by the Department of Defense in this committee and the Senate, military construction projects. So when are those going to be built? Presumably they were important.
They will be funded in the years ahead. They were deemed to be not as critical in terms of funding now.
Okay, I'd like to see the analysis of that criticality. Will you deliver that to my office next Wednesday also? Why the border wall, of which on the construction projects, $3.8 billion was taken out of those military construction projects across the world. Less than $900 million has been obligated. That money, $2.9 billion, has been sitting unspent for the last year. Are you aware of that? It's a fact. That's $2.9 billion of critical military construction projects that have not been built, but that money is sitting unspent, unobligated, somewhere in the Department of Defense or the Treasury or OMB or somewhere. Can you explain why? It is more important that that money be unspent, sitting unspent, rather than those construction projects, including the European Defense Initiative programs, not going forward, that were deemed to be critical in pushing back against Russia's aggression. Can you explain that to me?
I'll pass your request to the comptroller.
No, this is a policy question.
I'm sorry, Congressman, I don't have the status of all those, the funding elements in terms of your understanding that they're frozen.
That $2.9 billion is sitting unspent and unobligated. Apparently I'm out of time, but I'm not out of questions. You have been participating in a monumental...
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Bacon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate all three of you being here, and it's great to see General Shaughnessy again, who I served with off and on in my Air Force career, so great to see you here. My first question is to Admiral Fowler. I appreciate hearing the information you've been sharing on Russia and China's investment, so I won't go down that path, but that was where I wanted to go as well. But could you tell us a little bit the status of Chile right now? I know a few months back there was a lot of violence and demonstrations there, and they're a good ally, so I was concerned. Thank you.
Well, they are a good ally, as you mentioned, and they are an exporter of security. As we speak, a Chilean frigate is deploying with a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier strike group to the Asia Pacific, and this is a demonstration of the Chileans' commitment to global security, not just hemispheric security, and it's a demonstration of the Chileans' high-end capability. There's a lot to learn from working with them. Last year, we partnered with Chile and hosted Unitas Pacific in Chile, the nation, in fact, the world's longest-serving maritime exercise, and Chileans led that exercise, and they led it capably. We're working to do additional partnerships with the Chileans in cyber and in the land domain. And so we continue to have a strong relation. Earlier this year, unfortunately, lost a C-130. We surged some assets to try to help them do the search and rescue, but it was in the horrible conditions of the Antarctic. Closely looking at the instability, we're very pleased to work with our partners that have remained professional.
Is it starting to calm down?
Well, I think we haven't taken our eye off that ball, but we're in constant dialogue and sharing intelligence with them and helping them.
There was recently a report, too, of some violence in Colombia where the rebels used to operate. Are we still in a good position there in Colombia? Or are they doing all right with the peace agreement that they have?
I would, sir, I'd fight along the Colombians any day of the week. They're fighters, they're professional. They have tough security challenges that they've overcome. Plan Colombia was a success. It was a long-term investment. They invested $10 for every dollar that other nations invested. They've got a lot of challenges.
So
they've got terrorists.
The recent reports, were they just one-off, or was that just, or is it hopefully not a reoccurrence?
Well, we're watching that closely. They have close to 2 million migrants in their country. They're dealing with FARC dissidents. They're dealing with narco traffic, narco terrorism, and a significant challenge there. They're working all these challenges, and they're continuing to export security. Last year, they trained 1,500 special force units in Central America to help them get after their fight while still working their security challenges at home. So it's a top priority for us working with Colombia.
I flew with the Colombian Air Force about a half dozen times, extraordinarily professional. I was impressed. General Shaughnessy, you talked a little bit about our ability to detect ICBMs, and we have some capacity to interdict them. And you also mentioned it's much harder on the with the cruise missiles and the hypersonic weapons, and that we need new capabilities there. How does your budget request, how does it get towards this problem? What things are we trying to invest in to detect these new threats?
Yeah, first, if you indulge me for 1 second, I'll reminisce back to our time in service together. Thank you for your great work in the United States Air Force and then continuing to serve in Congress and then on this committee to continue to influence national security. Specific to your question, this is a very difficult challenge we're faced with going forward. One of the ways that we're really trying to get after it is working with industry. Instead of just going after a particular widget and saying, we need a widget to do this one mission set, we're actually going with industry and saying, here's our challenge. We need domain awareness. We need to understand what's happening from undersea to space. We need the ability to command and control that, and then we need those defeat mechanisms in a holistic system. And by really talking to industry and collaborating with industry, we see what's in the realm of the possible. And so we've actually had some success there, and then we're taking that into the budget process, because instead of asking like traditionally we do within the DOD is asking for a particular system, we're actually looking for a system of systems. And so how do we bring that into the acquisition process? We've had some success this year of really focusing on Homeland Defense, and that's why this year, 2020, is a year of Homeland Defense, because we now have that traction. Now it's time to turn that into actual results so we can defend our nation.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Crow?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you to all the witnesses and your continued service to the country and your testimony today. I understand that the FY20 counter-drug funding has been put on hold and may be cut up to $90 million to pay for U.S. Army Corps operating costs to execute border wall construction for FY19 projects. Admiral, are any of your counter-drug or drug interdiction projects impacted by this hold?
There was a delay in flowing counter-narcotics funding. That money's now flowing. So to date, we've had no impact to what was programmed for the FY20 level for our counter-narcotics funding.
How long was that delay?
It was several months into the year before that money started to flow. So the uncertainty really impacted our ability to do the kind of long-term management that we needed to, but we worked through it, and now the money's flowing.
Do you anticipate any cuts for your FY20 plan projects?
There has been discussions about cuts. You mentioned a figure. To date, we haven't received any cuts, and our accounts are, we've got a good plan, spend plan based on the current amount for the rest of the year.
And if there are any reductions in FY21, how will that impact your region?
This money is about one-third of all our funds for Southcom or counter-narcotics money. They're critical for the security of the United States of America. They're saving lives. So reductions in funds are going to be something that we're not going to do, and that is going to result in some narco trafficker that's not taken off the battlefield.
And for all the witnesses, are any of you anticipating, have you been ordered to create plans or in the process of planning for additional deployments to the southern border?
Not beyond the current support that's being provided.
So as of today, there is no planning for additional troop level increases to the southern border?
Not as of today, no.
No plans, sir.
Okay. Shifting gears just briefly on the issue of Arctic control and the increased pressures in the Arctic, there are plans to increase the number of our icebreakers. There have been appropriations for both the planning and the construction for those icebreakers. So General O'Shaughnessy, starting with you, are the current plans sufficient in your view, over the next 5 years, to field the icebreakers that are necessary to counter both Russian and Chinese influence in the Arctic region?
Well, first, I would applaud the effort of the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Navy that has supported that procurement of the icebreakers. I've actually been on the Polar Star, our icebreaker that is 44 or so years old. We need these icebreakers, and they need the polar security cutters now. I would also say that as the deployment happens, nominally six of them, at least 3 heavy, initial deployment's likely to Antarctica, and so we have to look not just at the first one that will be operational, but when is the second and third one going to be operational, which we'll need in the Arctic as well. So from my perspective, I'm very pleased that we are making progress in this. We had significant funds this year, over $500 million applied to it, but we need to continue that program, and if anything, we ought to be looking to accelerate it.
So the 6, as we understand it, would that be sufficient in the long term? Because I know Russia has upwards of 20.
Clearly, it's a start. As we work closely with the Coast Guard, this, especially with the 3 heavy as a minimum, potentially up to 6 heavy, depending on how they end up doing the procurement, will give us a start. But this is, we see diminishing sea ice, more navigation actually increases the need for those icebreakers in order to take advantage of the Arctic.
And Admiral, could you just very briefly classify for me, as we talk about the pivot to great power competition, a lot of people view that solely as an Indo-Pacific pivot, but could you just paint the picture for us as to the Chinese investments in Central and South America and how you believe that fits in with their overall strategy?
Yeah, it's clearly a global view for that great power competition. It's playing right out here in our neighborhood. The significant increase in foreign direct investment in loans, China's #1 creditor. The Chinese trade, I think by the end of this year, we'll see that Chinese is the #1 trading partner with the whole hemisphere. And as I've emphasized, our presence with small units like Joint Task Force Bravo, which is 685 soldier sailors, Marines, airmen, that's our main maneuver force along with our state partner. That's key to anchoring our positional advantage in this hemisphere.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. And I think that concludes our questions from members of the committee. Mr. Thornberry and I would both like to thank you very much for your participation today and for answering these valuable questions that will provide insights into the process as we move forward for the NDAA. And thank you again. The hearing is adjourned.